It's going to go live.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Hey, we're live here, and I have Ildi with me. Ildi, how do I pronounce your surname?
Racz.
Racz. And so we're going to hear about each other's backgrounds a little bit later, but I'm really excited to have Ildi with me today. And I met Ildi not that long ago, but I was really impressed with Ildi in terms of her grasp with something all of us have, which is time. And all of us also have not enough time. And so who best to have talk about time and time management than the queen of time, and that's Ildi Racz, right, Ildi?
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg. That's so funny. I just caught that sentence you said, that we don't have enough time. I mean, how funny that we talk about something that is linear and we cannot touch and we cannot change.
Yes.
From the perspective of not having enough of it.
Correct. And so whereas we are, a lot of us actually think we've got too much weight, almost all of us have got not enough time to do the things that we want. But what we've got today, people, is we have a structured presentation with Ildi, interactive. As usual, in the chat room, if I'm going to just ask if you can just let me know that if you can just say hi, that you can hear us okay. But otherwise, Ildi and I are going to get into things as we get going. So let's get into this, Ildi. And just before we do this, I think the probably best way of contextualizing is that the people that we deal with at Career 365 are people going through outplacement primarily, and when they no longer need to turn up to work, they lose their routine. And I found that actually in terms of working from home during these ever since COVID hit, that routine's far less predictable, namely being that I'd get up at a certain time, work out at a certain time, shower at a certain time, dress at a certain time, commute to a certain time, arrive at the office at a certain time. And that's a very parallel experience to people who no longer turn up to work in a work from home environment, or for participants going through outplacement. And that was my motivation in sharing this information with participants here, is around that. But this, what we're going to talk about, is really applicable to anyone, not just people who have been laid off.
You will be surprised, Greg. I think all the things that you just said are a big issue now with this whole working from home environment, because I know so many people who actually turn up at work in pajamas. Which is a funny thing, but it doesn't help, unfortunately, when it comes to productivity. So I'll just make some pointers on that too, because some of you might be in that space where in this transition you might not go back to another corporate job, but start a small business.
Yes.
Or take a totally different kind of career path. So it's quite important.
But it also might be that in the so-called new normal, that what we have is people working primarily in a distributed fashion, meaning that they are actually working from home. So we have a presentation today. Ildi, I'm going to let you take control of that presentation. And so whilst Ildi's going to get used to the technology, fingers crossed, let's cross over to the presentation and see that it works. Yay, it does. Okay. All right.
That's so well done.
So you're in the driver's seat. I'm going to be a bit of a passenger, but I'll interact with you. And what we're going to do with the chat window is, as the questions come in, what we'll do is we'll bank those up so that we have a smooth presentation. But we'll get to all the questions a little bit later. Over to you, Ildi.
Well, I guess we kind of met 3-4 weeks ago with Greg, online, of course, because that's the new norm. And it's a funny thing because I am in Melbourne, and it's such an amazing thing that we can connect all over Australia through technology. So, and we were talking exactly about those things that Greg just mentioned. And Greg said to me, it would be nice to talk a little bit about routines and how that affects our lives. And of course, we're just going to scrape the surface, because I could do just a workshop of 2-3 hours just on routines and how they can actually impact our lives, and how can they help not just work, but life in general. And I guess it's a really interesting thing, because we are creatures of habit. I guess you would agree with me, Greg, on this.
Yeah.
And as human beings, even if we think that, I'll just fly, go by just as the day comes, you'll find that even the most unstructured people still have structure in their lives, which is quite an interesting concept. But it's true. It's a really interesting thing when I start working with someone and they realize that they do have some sort of weekly routine. They do have some sort of rhythm, and I sometimes call it rhythm, because routine can be so boxing, I guess, as a word.
There is that rhythm. I mean, the rhythm of the weekend, a lot of people have. There's Saturday and Sunday's coming. So, but in all seriousness, what you're saying is that people who have got, who may appear disorganized, in fact, do have something that may be implicit rather than explicit. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but it's not just that. I often work with holistic practitioners. They hate the word routine. And they feel like the moment that you talk about routine, you box them and you cut their wings and they cannot be creative anymore, which you'll hear me talk a little bit later today, how planning actually sets you free. And it sounds like a little bit of an inside out, back to front sentence, but it's true, because if you use planning the right way and if you think about it the right way, it can actually set you free, and it can give you amazing, powerful tools to achieve what you really want to achieve. But I always like talking first about time. It's a fascinating topic because we all think that we can manage time. Well, as much as my title is time management specialist, I do believe that that's the wrong way to go about it, because you cannot manage time. We all have exactly the same amount of time. It's 168 hours a week. You cannot add to it. You cannot take away from it. Yet we still say things like, I don't have enough time, or I feel lost. The other thing that is connected usually to time is this whole feel of being overwhelmed all the time. And of course, I love this one, especially when someone comes from a corporate kind of space, is I work all the time.
I don't even think that has to be from a corporate space. I mean, as people who own their businesses, I'm sure you feel the same thing as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting how our concepts and our thinking about time actually affects how we are going to relate to our time. And you probably noticed at the beginning of the slides that I'm talking always about changing your mindset and changing the way that you think about time, because in the end, the moment that you start making friends with your time, things change. And there's a weird subtle connection between you and your time, and the moment that you think about it in a respectful way, things just start to change. And that's amazing, because it's not a big thing. And look, for anyone who's on the call, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know. Seriously, it's mission impossible to say anything that you don't already know from the perspective of time management. What I will try to do, though, today is put everything in a different perspective, so that you look at time from a different angle, so that you can start looking at how you relate to your own time from a different perspective. Because the moment you do that, everything starts to shift.
Well, I'm looking forward to learning about what that perspective is, because I love the idea, and I'm quite excited about the idea of making friends with time. Often I meet people, and frankly myself, there are times when I'm feeling I'm up against it all the time. So those bullet points I say all those things and then some. And time is not often a friend of mine. Time is often its enemy or an adversary. So I'm looking forward to that. And you'll take us through a little bit of the top line on that today, yeah?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I guess that's my biggest point of difference. I probably am a little bit of a disruptor when it comes to the time management space, because when I talk about time, I often leave out techniques like the Pomodoro technique, which probably you all heard of. Because what I find is that you can go to a full day time management workshop, come home with amazing notes. You look at them probably if you're lucky, you probably look at them for about a week, and then they land on the shelf and you find them when you move. Are you with me with that, Greg?
Yes.
It's a funny thing, but it's what we do with all this information that we get from different workshops. And unfortunately, it's so true when it comes to time management workshops. And the problem is that if I'm going to tell you what to do, you will just say, oh, it would be really nice if I could do that. And it stays in that could, would, should kind of space. While what I believe in is that everyone has their own way of interacting with their own time. And it's a really interesting thing, because I think your personality type is affecting how you relate to your own time. To some, like myself, time is of utmost essence. And if you stamp on my time, I will be quite upset with you. This is why I hate being late, for example. If we have a conversation and it goes too long, then I feel like you are robbing of my time, which is a really interesting thing, but it comes with the way that I am wired. But other people who are more people, to them, time has a totally different concept. Time is not important. The person is important. The happiness of the person that they are talking to, the community is important. So you have to put everything in a different perspective for them to still have a connection with time. And I think nowadays it's more important to understand how you can maximize your time rather than using some techniques to try to become more productive. So I always do this exercise, and I love this exercise because I think it's an eye-opener. It's an absolute eye-opener, because we all have 168 hours a week. And in an ideal world, you should be sleeping about 56 hours. And neuroscience says that if you're not sleeping that much, then you are pretty much robbing yourself from your brain capacity. It's not me saying this. So they say that 8 hours of sleep is essential when it comes to health, wellness, cognitive function, and to be whole, you need that sleep. So I assume that everyone sleeps with 56 hours a week, which is 8 hours a day. I'm at fault. I tend to sleep about 7, working towards that 8.
I aspire to 7.
That's a good one. Good word, aspire to 7. But I just assume that we are doing in a perfect world, we should be sleeping 56 hours. And then I only worked with 40 hours a week. And I mean, some might be surprised, but the reality is that if you look at highly successful people and you look at their schedules and you do some research on how much they work, you will find that they work under 40 hours a week. And that really makes me think, why do we think, especially as small business owners, that we have to work 60, 70-hour weeks in order to succeed? Ever since I'm refocused on time management, I do strive to be as close as possible to that 40 hours, because I find that you can't really be productive for more than that time. And again, I have to quote neuroscience, because neuroscience says that you cannot be productive for more than 4 to 6 hours a day. Sorry. If you multiply that by 5, the number is quite scary. So even 40 hours is probably pushing our activity limits. It's physiology. It's nothing that we can do about it. We can stretch it for short periods of time, but we can't do it on the long term, because that's when the burnout comes. And that's when you feel like you can't find yourself again, and you just become demotivated and you don't want to do anything. What's really interesting is that if you deduct from that 168, these two numbers, you're still left with 72 hours of fun.
Fun.
I call it fun. That's pretty much life. And it, as you can see, the balance is quite right. There's more fun and life in this equation than work. And that's what we should actually strive towards. Or at least that's how I feel about it.
Assuming that work and fun, that work's not fun here, but I get what you're saying. It's discretionary hours over and above work.
Absolutely. And look, the reality is that when you start to think about the language that we use, we talk about work-life balance all the time. Am I right? So there's I actually have two big issues with this sentence. First of all, balancing is an act. It takes a lot of energy to stay balanced.
Doesn't it?
So why are we actually setting ourselves up to something that is hard to do? And our natural nature as human beings would be to not do it. Anything that's too hard, we don't want to do. It is what it is. It's how we function. And the other thing is that we always talk about work-life balance. My question is, when did work become more important than life?
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. And so there's, I've heard what I like to use is the term work-life harmony. It's the amount that individuals want to put into things themselves.
Well, Greg, I would challenge you to even change it one step further and say life-work harmony.
That's good. Okay.
Because that's what we should be striving towards. Life-work harmony. We need to work because we want to live and we want to have the life that we want, not the other way around. Not the other way around. You don't
work-life harmony, life-work harmony. Okay, yeah, it's good.
Life-work harmony, because you have to fit work into life, not the other way around. And you know what? The reality is that most of us do fit life into work and not work into life. And this is where I meet so many people who say, I will travel when I retire. I will do this when I retire. I will spend more time with my children when I will retire. There's a big problem with that. You cannot reproduce big moments in time. I mean, the first step, the first word, all those firsts in our children's lives, if you're not there, you're not there. You miss them. You can't do them later.
Yeah, correct. So let's dive a little bit more deeply into the presentation. But you make a very, very good point there.
I just thought to give you a little bit of a background on us. Greg will tell you how he landed in this space. About me, you probably hear my thick accent. So I was born in Transylvania, and I call myself a little bit of a serial immigrant because I immigrated first from Transylvania, which is part of Romania, after my ex-husband, to Hungary, where we had our little family, and I have 2 beautiful daughters. And from there, we just jumped ships, and we thought, I mean, if we immigrate again, then we might as well do it well. And we just thought the other end of the earth is the right space for us. So we landed in Australia about 12 years ago. And what's really interesting is that before we came here, everyone said to us that this country either makes you or breaks you. And it's a funny thing, because in our case, it made me, but it broke him. And this is how about 5 years ago, I ended up being a single mom with 2 beautiful girls. And even though I had a just like any good mom, I had a party plan business on the go, and I couldn't find a decent planner. So my story started with creating a planner just because I needed one, and I wanted to achieve my goals, and I wanted to stay on top of everything. And becoming a single mom is pretty much a space like leaving a job and searching for your next best thing, because suddenly you have to do a lot more than before. And from there, after about a year of selling the planner, I realized that it's not enough to have a good planner or a tool. You need to know how to use it. And this is how the consultancy side started to grow. And I've always been passionate about time and how we use time. And it's a funny thing because I went to this amazing networking event online, of course, and I met Jules Brooke, who's a natural connector, and she has this amazing group called She's the Boss. It's a quite good one. And she said, "Oh, you have to connect with Greg." So this is how we kind of connected, and we are here today.
It's lovely, and that was only recent. So yes, Jules was the connection. So very briefly, most of the people who are watching this know that I've been in the career transitioning space for employee support when people are being made redundant, laid off, especially in this environment. But we also do employee onboarding. I've written a few books around the career transitioning space. I've been in the HR profession for quite some years. That's what I attribute to having none of this stuff left. So, and time is a really big thing, as we've been talking about in the lead up to this particular part of today. For me, and again, I just wanted, one of the main things was, how do we give participants going through a time in their lives when they don't have routine, how do we actually help them? So let's get more deeply into the presentation with some top line concepts, and over to you, Ildi.
Well, just because we're talking about time, I always think about, why do we feel like time seems to slip away? It's like, it's almost like we have pockets, and the pockets have some holes, and we kind of lose seconds, minutes, hours. And I find that one of the reasons that can happen to us is that we do not have a clear, defined structure for our days. It's a little bit like living a life on Post-it notes. And as much as this is, you might think that it's okay, the reality is that if you want to be a bit productive, and if you want to make the most of your time, and if you want to create space for those amazing things that could happen in life, you know, moments with your family, or in general, what you need to know is that every time you shift your attention from one task to the other, you are losing time. Because it takes time. There's a price to shift your attention. This is why multitasking is a myth. Because every time you shift your attention between different tasks, you cannot go to the same depth of focus and concentration as you were before. And probably this is why our children struggle that much with focusing, because they are conditioned to kind of slide between their phones, computers, and the environment. So they kind of are never present. And it's an interesting thing, because I do talk quite a lot about this whole concept of being present. But here's a number for you. Every time you shift your attention between one task to the other, you are losing somewhere between 7 to 26 minutes.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. And I actually saw, just on that, I'm not sure if you've seen the same example, but I remember some time back, I don't know who I can attribute this to, but if we actually take the alphabet of A through to Z and we write the corresponding numbers of 1 to 26, you can write down A, B, C, D all the way through to Z quite rapidly, and 1 through to 26. But if you then write A1, B2, C3, and so on and so forth, it takes so much longer. And it's a wonderful example about multitasking, how much it slows you down with that. So it may take, let's call it 30 seconds to do A through Z, 30 seconds 1 through 26, but it's going to take a lot more than just 30 seconds plus 30 seconds to get through the combination of all that, because one's switching through the multitasking.
That's exactly right, Greg. And there's so much on the internet. So if you're interested, because it's a fascinating topic, it's worth doing some research and reading, because it's amazing how much time we lose just by thinking that multitasking is a thing, especially as women. It's really interesting how men are wired a little bit differently. There's no good or bad way, but for a man, usually it is easier to keep the sequential way of looking at things. And probably it goes back to that caveman kind of space, where as the home carer, women had to have their attention a bit more spread on many other tasks. But the reality is that no matter what you think about yourself, and no matter whether you think that you're good at multitasking, the reality is that you're not. And the moment that your attention shifts, you are losing time. And this might not be important if you're just doing something for fun. But it can be a huge price when you are trying to be productive, maximize your work time, and have most of the time possible for life. So it's really important to have clarity around it, because and there's amazing techniques around it, on beginning with setting a timer and ending with I don't know, using techniques like the Pomodoro technique and playing with how much you can focus. There's a lot you can do in this space. But what I really want you to think about is that you have to have a clear structure when you work, because that's how you can maximize productivity. It is what it is. But what I found is that once you start applying the same kind of principles to life, you become a lot more present in your life. And it's really interesting how many of us tend to cook and think about work, or sit in front of the TV and think about work instead of enjoying the leisure moment. Or the other way around, you sit in front of a computer, you try to do work, and your mind slips away to the wash, to the folding, to the children, to the homework, to whatever. And it actually takes your productivity, it hits your productivity in a negative way. So being present is quite important, because that's how you can maximize the use of your time. And you know what? I think there's no such thing as wasted time. You only waste time if you are not present in what you do. So sitting in front of the TV, binge watching, let's say, Game of Thrones, is okay if it's in your plan, if you were planning to have that downtime, and if that's what you like doing. So why not give yourself permission to sit in front of the TV and enjoy that show? Because the moment that you start having guilt around it, that little thing creeps in, you're just wasting time. You're not enjoying the show, and you're not being productive. So that's wasting time in my books.
Good point.
So the other thing is that I try to find 3 big reasons why we can feel like that. And I guess one of the biggest ones is the lack of goals. And that's a big one, especially when you are transitioning from a structured workplace into something else. Sometimes it's hard to actually find your target. And the goals, and of course, that ties in really nicely with the lack of focus, because the moment that you have a goal, it's easier to focus and to go towards something. And of course, I love this concept of having too much time at hand. Sometimes having too much time is as bad as not having time at all. And you might find that time stretches somehow. The more time you give to a task, the longer it will take to be done.
It's Murphy's Law. It's one of Murphy's Law, which is the task expands to fill the available time. And haven't we all found that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I also feel like when you don't have any kind of goals, it's like jumping in the car and telling the GPS, "Take me somewhere," and nothing will happen.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
We're somewhere. So goals are, even if you have a bit of an aversion towards the word itself, because it's not necessarily everyone's word. But I think it doesn't matter what you call them, goals, intentions, or I don't know what else you might call them, but definitely have some sort of direction, because without that, it's really hard to actually get anywhere. And sometimes those goals change. And I guess that's the other big thing. We are afraid of goals because they don't always, they are not always achievable, or at least we feel like that. And I meet so many people who actually say, "Oh, I don't set goals." Why? Because I know I won't reach them. It's just a mindset. It's not more than that. It's easy. If you want to get on track and you want to set goals again, then the first little goal, and it's a really cool little exercise, just set yourself the goal to get out of the room. That's a goal. And it's achievable, it's timely, it's smart, it's easy to do. And you can actually start retraining yourself to actually not be afraid of them, because goals are quite important. And without them, I don't know, you just float.
Yes.
Life.
And Ildi mentioned, just sidebar here, she mentioned about half a minute ago that SMART, where SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And we talk about that within the program as well, where we talk about how people can structure up value in their resume and in their LinkedIn. But as far as a goal is concerned, SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Right, Ildi?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
You can actually play with these letters and put a lot more behind them, but goals are really important, and I guess the measurable and the time bound are the key things, because without a goal is not a goal if you can't measure it in some shape or form, if you can't really tie it in with your available time, and I think this is why we are so afraid of goals, I think. But moving more into that space of routine and what that does to us, and how we relate to it, just like Greg mentioned, you mentioned at the very beginning how, you get up in the morning, you have a morning routine. When you go to work, you have a shower, have breakfast or not have breakfast, have coffee. When you have to be in the car in order to get where you need to go. And now once you lose that, you suddenly have a lot of time at hand. And this is why I mentioned beforehand the too much time issue. What's really interesting is that as human beings, we are creatures of habit. And you might not think that that's true, or you might have doubts around it, but the reality is that we are creatures of habit. And very quickly we develop new routines and new habits that are not necessarily serving us. This is why I find it so, so detrimental that with this whole online world, many of us don't really dress up in the morning anymore. You sit in front of your computer in your jammies or your tracksuit and so on, which you might think, what's the problem with it? The problem is that these things, pajamas, tracksuits, all these things are in our language are bound to a different kind of meaning, which is related to relaxation, not work. So you are setting your productivity level a lot lower than you would otherwise. So I always say that even if you sit in front of a screen, show up, dress up, create those morning routines that actually set you up for work and for a different kind of mindset. Also, having these routines actually can help you when you feel down. And this is a whole other topic. But I love talking about routines from this perspective, because if you have good routines at hand, you can use them as reset buttons. You had a crap morning, nothing really worked. What do? You can feel sorry for yourself and just lose the whole day and say, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. Or you can actually hit a reset button and say, nah, I can do something about it. One of the things that you can do, and it's very, very simple, and it has been taught to me by a beautiful lady called Lindsay Pagent years and years and years ago in direct sales at a conference. Put on runners. Runners are associated with doing.
That's a good idea.
It's a funny thing,
Yeah.
but just a simple thing like putting on runners can actually change your whole mindset and the way that you do things. But especially now that we are kind of homebound, tricks like this can actually help you change into a productive space. So this is why I think that you have a lot to gain if you have them, and you have a lot to lose if you just are not aware of them, because you still have them, you just don't know what they are. And when it comes to this, when there's no routine, you might end up in that constant overwhelm space, because nothing seems to be done. Your to-do list just grows. And I'm not sure about you, but it's human nature that we build our to-do list, and when it becomes too long, you look at it and you say, nah, it's too hard. Throw it out, start a new one. So nothing changes. You're just doing exactly the same on repeat. And the other thing that I find is that when you are trying to live on a to-do list and you allow yourself to be in this routineless space, you become reactive. So all that matters is when the phone jingles, something will pop into your attention, and you'll either attend it or not. But you are reactive all the time to the outside world, instead of actually looking at what you need to do and what you should be doing in order to get where you want to go. And of course, the other big thing is that not being aware of routines and not being aware of our structures, natural structures, is leading us into a space where you have no direction. So you're again in that state of floating, where you feel like you went through the whole day, you were busy all day, yet you still feel like you haven't done anything. Can anyone relate to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just before we dive in a little bit more deeply, there is in neuro-linguistic programming the idea of dressing up for work in a work from home environment, as you're talking about, or otherwise, but not staying in pajamas. Pajamas is anchored in NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, and pajamas are anchored behaviorally to being sleepy, relaxing, and so on and so forth. To your point, getting dressed up or changing something anchors behaviors in another way. And I know that one of the important things that they do in the military, I've read a number of things. I've not served in the military, but I've read this is a common thing about routine, and that is to make a bed is an important thing. And so even if you're working as participants in this program, in our outplacement program, without clear direction, one of the most important things that I've also learned about routine is make the bed. Get dressed and make a bed. That basically sets up a routine for moving out of one mode and into another.
Do you know why, Greg?
Tell me.
It's a funny story. I read it probably a couple of weeks ago. There was an article, and this general, or what, I don't know. I'm not versed in military.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Point is that what he said was that why is it important to actually make the bed? And the whole background story was why I started to research it was because my partner, Tony, he kept saying, why are you making the bed? It's such a stupid thing. We're going to mess it up anyway. But what he said was that if you make the bed and you don't do anything else during the day, you have still done something for the day.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And it just creates that space of accomplishment. You still have something that you tick off. And that's quite powerful. So especially when it comes to children, they are probably notoriously the ones who are not doing anything if they can.
That's
and
right.
I have girls. People say, oh, they are much better. No, they are not. It's exactly the same. But the point is that I find that everyone has routines. It's just that you might not be aware of them, and they might not serve you. And that's where the problems start, when you have routines, when you do have habits that are not serving you. That's when you struggle. So just going back one thought to language and linguistics. I mean, I was born in a bilingual environment. Hungarian is my mother tongue, but of course the state language was Romanian. And then I learned German, a bit of French, a bit of Italian, a bit of this, a bit of that, and of course English. What I find is that when you learn a language, you start appreciating the way of a word in a different way. While I see many times around me, people use words without really thinking about what they really mean. It's so important, because whether you like it or not, the language that we use affects the way that we are acting. And this is exactly what you were saying about pajamas. Pajamas are about relaxation. It is what it is. It's really hard to recondition yourself to think and feel in a different way about pajamas. And that's true for many other things. This is like planning or diaries. These words mean different things. And we often I often hear people say, I'll go grab my calendar. How? The word itself means, it's a definition of time. How do we think about time in general? That's a calendar. Right. So it's a lot of little things that it's fascinating, because it will make you speak and be mindful about what you say. And I love this quote, just be careful what you say, because the one person who always listens is you.
Right. No, it's very good. Very good.
So going back to routines a little bit, making what you gain from having routines is a lot more, because you are making the most of your life. The moment that you are aware of those routines, you can change them, you can twist them, you can turn them, you can create new ones that actually serve you. Also, what I found is that having good routines that serve you and are helping you move forward actually are improving your self-worth. And there's a magic in recognizing and acknowledging at the end of the day, I've done well today. I ticked off these things. I wasn't just busy, I was actually productive. Suddenly your self-worth is different, and that self-worth sets you up for next day. Which is a really interesting thing, and we could go into it again, even though it's not my plate. But I find that it's really important to have a bit of awareness around it. And of course, the moment that you are aware of your routines and you use them well, you feel in control. And I guess that's the key, because no one likes to float through the day and not be able to feel accomplished. Feeling in control actually is an amazing, I don't know, it just gives your life a different depth and perspective.
Certainly does. Absolutely. Okay. So,
this moves us into that space of planning, because routines are great, but if you don't give them some purpose and if you don't align them with a lot of other things, then it's almost like what's the point in even having a routine? But what I find is that this concept of freedom and planning is quite fascinating, because I find that the moment that you start planning, you pick up on so many skills and concepts that you didn't even consider before. One of them is learning to say no. It's a really powerful one, and there's more and more on this topic because healthy boundaries actually help you move forward, no matter what that is, whether that's finding a new career or building a new business, or just even getting through family life in a manner so that you are not exhausted by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's a really cool picture, because it's all that we shouldn't do, I think.
But at the same time, it's an image of can see here. It's a mum doing everything here. To your point, males are much more linear. I don't think male. I'm generalizing here. Talk about myself. It dumbfounds me how women can do this by and large, whereas guys are one task at a time.
But you know what, Greg? It's a funny thing. Is the same neuroscientist who I heard a presentation, and she was saying that we tend to go into this gender neutral kind of space that doesn't serve us. Because you need to understand that, especially if you are a man, you are wired to have these beautiful empty boxes that you can fill with mindfulness. You know, when a wife or a partner or a woman in general asks a man and you say, what are you doing? And the man says to you, nothing. There's a really interesting thing for any lady who is on this call. Please understand, they really do nothing. They think nothing. They do nothing. They want nothing. And you know what? They need that nothing to actually be sane. And it's so interesting, because ever since I've heard this presentation, when I see and I talk to my partner and he says, I don't do anything, I do nothing, I just simply turn around and walk away. It's bloody hard, because as a woman, I straight away want to fill that little empty box. It's my natural conditioned thing, but I do acknowledge that he needs that empty box. He needs that for his own sanity, for his own health, and so on. Now, here's the thing. Ladies, on the other hand, we have to work hard to get those nothing boxes. We do yoga, we do mindfulness, we do meditation. We have to do all these things to stop thinking. And the thing is that the moment that we stop thinking, and I guess, Greg, if you're versed in NLP, you probably can back me on this. We need these boxes to get fresh ideas. Without them, you don't get them. This is why running or walking or exercise in general helps.
Yeah.
It's such an amazing thing, but it's understanding how we function. And again, it comes down to your relationship with time and why are you relating to everything the way that you relate. So when I say that there's freedom in planning, trust me a little bit on this and run with me, because I think that planning gets rid of some of those big things that make us trip over, like a to-do list. I hate having to-do lists. I don't do them. I literally create a to-do list at the beginning of the week, and I straight away cut it up in tiny pieces, and I allocate those tasks into time blocks. Why? Because like this, it's not in front of my mind. I don't have a huge list running through my mind all the time. I get rid of the clutter. So I don't have to think about that 4 or 5 things until the time comes. And there's an amazing thing when you start creating space in your head for like this. Amazing things happen. because our brain is not necessarily designed to retain everything at front of mind. It's more created to think, to create, to do new things, to do amazing things. So planning actually helps with getting rid of that clutter. And there's some really cool tools that you can do to get rid of that clutter. But time blocking and using that as a main tool in planning is quite important. And if you do any kind of reading, beginning with Stephen Covey's work, and we had this chat a couple of days ago with Greg, it's so important to have clarity on where your time will be going. And that's how you can make the right choices for you. This is how you can start working towards goals, because you the moment you create a plan, you map out your week or your month, you suddenly can see the gaps. You see what fits and what doesn't fit. And again, I can't go back enough to that little word, no. The moment that you mapped out your week, you know what you can say yes to and what you can't say yes to.
Yes, yeah, it's very true. And the Stephen Covey thing, you and I, the conversation we had a couple of days ago was talking about the distinction between what's important versus what's urgent. And so he raised that up, and there's the Eisenhower model as well. And so the important thing is that the essence of all this is not reacting to things that come up. Yes, there are those things, but it's about this next slide. Let's go into that.
It's exactly this. It's this relationship between choices, priorities, and goals. And I do have a model that I don't have on these slides. But the reality is that these three are very much interconnected. And I don't really care where your awareness is, whether that's in your choices or your priorities or your goals. No matter which one you know, you can actually work out the other two. It's really just bringing to the front of mind and thinking about them. So if you make the right choices, they will set a right set of priorities, and those priorities will feed into the right goals.
But you have to have two, and the third one will come into will
no,
write
actually,
itself.
I think it's enough to have one.
Uh-huh.
For example, if you make the choice to sit in front of the TV, whether you like it or not, your priority will be to watch TV. And the goal will be to get through that one episode or the series or whatever the length that you set to it. So you see how just the one thing, the choice of sitting in front of the TV, actually got the other two straight in line. The same goes if your priority is to relax, that will actually generate some sort of goal, and some sort of it will mean that you make some sort of choices. So it doesn't really matter where you have awareness. If you have awareness in any of the 3 points, it's fairly easy to actually work out the other two. But I also think that the glue between these three is the plan.
Right.
Because if you have the right plan, then all these three will interact in a really nice manner, and they will serve you really, really well. But I also need to point out that you have to be aware that you make about 35,000 choices a day. So the question is, how much of them are on the conscious level? How aware are you of your choices? Because you can't change something until you are aware of it.
And by being much more intentional, being much more conscious of something, then it helps to underpin, whether you're conscious on your choices or priorities or your goals, it helps to underpin the making of the plan.
And here's the thing, and just let's mention it because it's not again on the slides, but let's talk a little bit about procrastination, because this is where procrastination comes in place. As long as you are not aware of the fact that you are procrastinating, you can't change it. The moment that you gain awareness around procrastination, and you know that you're just postponing something for who knows what reason, I call it the sorry pity party. I usually, what I do personally, I set my timer at 5 minutes, and I allow myself to actually feel sorry for myself for another 5 minutes. And that's okay. It's okay to feel sorry for ourselves from time to time. Sometimes things happen and we can't do anything about it. So why not? Just embrace the feeling and get on with it. But once the 5 minutes is up, I just change and switch. So what can I do about it? And I know that many big all-time management specialists say, just tackle the hardest job, and if you're done with that, then everything's going to be fine. But I find that if you're coming out of that procrastination space, the easiest thing to do is to pick the easiest task on your list.
And that's very much aligned with the coaching that we provide participants going through the program, is just to do something small, not to say that they're going to network with 10 people today, but to do something there, and something small just on that. And let's get a little deeper into this. But the joke about I'm not procrastinating, I'm just decided to procrastinate. And so that's an intentional decision. And then moving on, let's get into practical tips on how to create a new routines.
It ties really well in with this, because I find that we are so afraid of that word procrastination that we forget that it's just part of life. And I think routines can actually help you break those procrastination blocks, because if you have good routines, like putting on your runners, or I don't know, I know especially ladies who go back and redo their makeup. That's again one routine that actually can help you move out of that space of self-pity and feeling sorry for ourselves, because that's what procrastination is. We push things to the side because we think it's too hard. But in reality, and this is a really good book, if you haven't read it, it's called The One Thing by Gary Keller. It's a cool book because it only has a very simple concept. Finding that one block that will start moving a task forward is the most important thing that you will do. And that's how you break procrastination. That's how you create routines, and so on. And I mean, what I really want to point out here is that routines take at least 66 days to actually embed them in your daily life, because routines are pretty much a big part of habits. And as much as in the olden times we thought that you can be done within, I think, 29 days they were saying, or something like that, the reality
21.
it takes,
the reality is 66.
It's a lot longer. And I would probably even say that even the 66 is that's what they are using lately. But I still think that even that is just scraping the border.
Well, one of the other things that I would add to that, and that is that it's a habit as long as you continue to do it, even if it's a supportive habit, even if you break that pattern by one, you have to start at the first day again just to be able to embed it forward.
That's exactly right. And that's where people say, oh, it didn't work for me. Oh, did you break it somewhere in the middle? Oh, well, yes. So it starts all over again, unfortunately. So there's a real power behind creating the right routines. And you know what? The reality is that you have to stop and think about them. You have to look at what your circumstances are. I can't walk in and say to you, hey, Greg, from tomorrow morning, you start with putting on makeup.
Not with me. I won't do that.
That's it.
Yeah.
So it has to tie in with who you are, what you represent, the way that you function. Are you sporty? Are you not sporty? When are you usually running? And all those things. So your routines have to tie in with who you are. And if they don't tie in with who you are, you will never use them. And they will never serve you. And hence, your time management will be off place, because you will always be thinking about what you should be doing instead of focusing on what you are doing.
Yeah.
And of course, once you have them, use them. And don't be afraid to use them in different circumstances for different purposes, like resetting the day. Why not use a part of your morning routine as a reset if you need to do that? It's just daring to do it, and being bold enough to tap into those routines on everyday basis.
Absolutely. So, Ildi, I'm just aware of the time. So,
Yeah.
just probably as we're coming towards the home stretch, so we've got about another 10 minutes maximum, I'd say, here. So, how can routine give back time? What are your tips here?
I'm actually at the end of it. This is almost no, actually, this is the last slide.
Okay. Well,
So
that's
we are right on time.
perfect.
And of course, we want to give a few minutes
We
for some
do.
questions
We
if
do.
that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find is that the way that I see is that the moment that you use routines to support your day-to-day life, you gain a lot of time by not shifting your focus all the time. And I guess that's the most obvious one. And it's very, very, very much measurable. And it's so easy because when someone starts working with me on time management, I usually ask for a time log. And it's quite obvious after a few days that there's so much wasted time between jumping from one task to the other, not thinking through how you conduct your whole day. And these are the easy, simple, measurable things that will help you save time. But I also think that good routines will speed up the way that you do things. And I guess the best example is a factory. You won't see a factory that would start with a product from creating every product from first step to the last step in one shot. They will do 10,000 once, then they will do 10,000 second steps, they will do 10,000 third steps, and so on. Why? Because it speeds up the whole process. It's a routine in the and applying exactly the same concept in our lives. If you are doing calls, then make 4 or 5 calls one after the other. You're already in that space. You are already talking. Your whole mindset is around communication. So why not use that and get through as many as you can and have it out of the way? If you're answering emails, then you're in the typing space. It's a totally different kind of language and different way of communication. Again, don't just do one, do many. And of course, we didn't talk about disruption because that's another big one. But it actually stops you using these routines in a good way, stops you from living in that constant disruption.
Yeah.
And I always suggest there's nothing wrong with putting your phone on airplane mode for 25 minutes, even if you know that someone might be calling you. Record a really cool voicemail and say to people that I will be attending this call in, I don't know, half an hour, your time limits, but use technology to serve you and don't allow technology to hack your life. And of course, having the routines help you protect your boundaries, which is really, really important. And it ties in with the planning, because once you have a good plan that is supported by good routines, it will be so much easier to say no to the shiny object syndrome. And it prevents overwhelm, because you don't end up booking another thing in the day just because it happened. You will feel so much more comfortable to say, I'm so sorry, I can't do it today. How about next Monday? And that's a skill. It takes time. And we are living in a world that is conditioned to say yes. You have to agree with that. And I guess a really good example was this morning. One of my gorgeous clients said to me, I just took on board a job that I should not have. But that's the first step, recognizing that you should not have.
Yes.
That on board is big.
Yes.
So that's pretty much how I see that routine can save you time, and not save you time, because that's probably the wrong way to put it. It actually gives you more time.
Yeah, it gives you structure, gives you absolutely. I think that's that's a great place to emphasize a few things, and one is that so often when I'm coaching participants going through an outplacement program, that they do get routine in something. And I think the idea, what you're saying here about batching tasks together, deciding that you're going to have a certain slot of the day in which to reach out to people, or to write your resume, or to go on to LinkedIn and see what jobs there are, or so on and so forth. But with regards to that, it's routine's really important. Did get a question here about how do you create a routine if you don't have one, Ildi?
Start with the end again, with the end in mind. Know what the outcome should be.
Mm-hmm.
If the routine is all about work, or just a day,
Mm-hmm.
then look at what you really want to achieve each day, and the routine should pinpoint all the major points, major turns in your day. So, for example, if it's morning, then think about what your morning routine is. What does every single morning look like to you? The moment that you start thinking about it, you'll see the gaps. Oh, I'm not having breakfast. I'm always hungry an hour later, and I don't have a chance to have a bite. So how can I change that? What I strongly suggest is, though, is don't change too much, and start with bite-sized routine changes. So if you're changing your morning routine, then just change your morning routine, but don't touch the rest of the day. Once you embedded the new routine and it becomes a habit, then you can change the next part or the next bit, so you can adapt it. Why? Because sometimes the routine that you work out might not even work for you.
No, it's a very good point. I actually, I think that's extremely helpful. Instead of changing the world, change a little bit in terms of your own routine and so on and so forth. I've read some stuff which was about creating mini habits, and again, it's just doing a little bit and continuing to repeat that little thing before you shift on to something else. I think it's great. Another question just came up, and that is about creating a new ritual. How would you recommend a new ritual be created, please?
Well, I guess we just touched on that, but the new ritual is.
So routine and ritual are different?
I think we use the ritual more as in the little bits, the mini habit. That would probably be a ritual, and the ritual can be used at any time of the day, so that you condition yourself to have something connected to a ritual. So, for example, one of the best examples is the runners. That's a small ritual. Putting on the runners is connected to something, and that will mean doing something, changing your mindset around, getting you out of the space where you were into a different space. But you can have little rituals around many things. So, for example, sitting down to work, knowing what you need, having an organized desk, clearing up first your space. There's a lot of things, but those are more parts of the routine rather than individual items. They're almost like, little cue cards that you can use at any time.
I think it's excellent. It really is. Ildi, I'd like to actually I do want to say thank you. What you can see here on the slide is a link to Ildi's business, antplanners.com. You can see her connections. Yes, I do want an extra 10 hours in my week for things that I enjoy rather than my business taking over me. I do want to thank you with that. I want to just encourage if there are any other questions before we do wrap, but I do want to also emphasize that we do have a participant support community in LinkedIn. Follow that link for anybody in going through our outplacement program. Ildi, I do want to actually just say thanks so much to you, because you've covered off an enormous amount whilst we've gone through this. But the main thing is around routines and the importance of becoming. What I've learned from you is about the principle of having time become, or making friends again with time. And one of the simple ways that that I've learned what you were saying, but simple but not easy, is creating routines and having the discipline of creating routines. And so when we don't have structure in our lives, like for example, people who used to go to work and now don't have that structure around it, is creating some form of routine that provides some form of structure, whether it's getting out of bed, making the bed, putting on clothes, doing some exercise, then setting up a time to allow tasks to be done in a particular batch. The other thing I've learned from you today is about not being overwhelmed by to-do lists, but in actual fact, looking at things that you want to do and setting blocks of time in a week to be able to do that. And so I've learned an enormous amount, and I do think that really anybody who's interested in diving more deeply into this topic, you'll see this in the show notes at the end of today's presentation. You'll see show notes at the bottom, which will actually talk about, which will have these slides. But in addition to that, it's going to have connection points to Ildi. So I want to thank you so much, Ildi, on really putting your heart into today. I can see how passionate you are about this. And I look forward probably to having you back on another webinar where we can talk another aspect of making friends with time. So today we've had Ildi, who specializes in that. I think making friends with time is something I've never really been able to master. I'd say I'll become a client of yours as well.
I'm still trying, Greg, so good.
Okay. All right, nothing like being real. Look forward to having you back on the show at some particular point. Ildi, thanks very much. And for anybody else that has any other questions, send them to me. I'm happy to actually send them off to Ildi, or vice versa, just direct to Ildi through the show notes and the connections. Thanks so much, Ildi. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.
Bye.